So we've had 2 segments of 22 minutes or so so far in this lecture, and I might just start doing these segments so that I know that the camera is not turning off on me. Let's see where I was. I guess I'm at the bottom where it says the biggest single defining characteristic of these children is that they exhibit significant and obvious defects in multiple areas. Significant and obvious defects in multiple areas of their functioning. But I did want to read to you on the bottom of page 403 this paragraph. Despite the intense challenges their disabilities impose, many students with severe disabilities exhibit warmth, persistence, determination, cheerfulness, a sense of humor, sociability, and various other desirable traits. So I just think that's really important to read, because as I'm talking, and reading and with you through the textbook about how we define these children, and we define them by their deficits, it is really important to remember they have assets also. And it's wonderful and interesting that there are people who want to be teachers to this very particular type of child, and they want to interact with this child, and they want to help this child gain very basic skills and functional skills. And so these are the special ed teachers who really specifically work with students with profound and multiple disabilities. Of course, their parents and family members, would already know that these children have warmth and humor and playfulness and persistence. But it's very important that the teachers at school and the other students at school have a chance to understand this, that this person isn't just what you see, which is this big group of pretty profound disabilities, but also that this is a person, and this person has wonderful assets too. Okay, so deaf blindness is another one of these categories, and I'm talking now to you about the characteristics of students who are deaf blind. And Helen Keller is the person that we most know in our society in America who was a person who was deaf and blind. She also was very, very bright, so she did not have an intellectual disability. And most of the students in this category do have some intellectual deficits. So the first thing I want to say about students with deaf blindness is that some of them are gifted intellectually, or even operate in the realm of normal IQ. They just have these 2 very profound sensory impairments. But just think about what they could learn if they did have normal intellect. About 90% of these children do have one or other, an additional severe disability. So they have the deaf blindness, but they also have another profound disability in this category. So these are some of the interesting facts about that. 76% of them have cognitive impairments. So as I was just saying, that some percentage of these children could have normal intellect, 76% have measured cognitive impairments. 49% have physical disabilities. 59% have complex health needs. So this is a child who was born with these birth defects, and we'll talk a little bit maybe about causal factors in a while. But this is a child that is born not just with one thing wrong with them. I keep saying this. I think I'm sort of conceptualizing it myself even, what this child is mostly going to be like in a classroom. Another study found that students who are deafblind have very low functional skills. So when I say functional skills, remember here we're talking about self-care, communication, interaction with others, motor skills, getting themselves around. Part of this is that, parents can, because these children learn fairly slowly, parents and caregivers can just start doing a lot for these children. And when you do that, you take away any kind of initiative that they might have to do some things on their own. And so, sometimes when these children show up at public school, they have very little in the way of functional skills. And, this is important. These are goals for these children, are that they would learn to perform most age-appropriate functional skills. But this is almost impossible for them. So for an example could be a child like this is not going to learn how to play a complex video game for all kinds of reasons, right? So it's a very sobering picture. These students may engage, now I'm talking about deaf-blind students, they also might engage in self-stimulatory behavior. As I said before, things like head rocking or finger flicking, the book talks about that. And this is again thought to be just something that they do. It's a self-stimulating, internally driven behavior because they receive so little stimulation from their environment, because their sensory, some of their sensations, sensory abilities are impaired. These children may look as if they are unengaged. They may not initiate interaction or respond to others. In this way, they can seem passive or even like they're refusing to comply. And so they kind of have to be taught in the classroom with teachers. Their teachers have to start to teach them ways to initiate, engage, show that they're paying attention and participating, if you will. So I wrote in my notes, wow, what a picture. Existing, what would it be like to exist almost within yourself? Because you can't hear and you can't see, and until people learn to use touch to communicate with you, and you learn the system or symbol for communicating. And what if your IQ is 25? That's a really, really internal kind of living experience in terms of your life, the quality of your life. So without efforts of teachers and parents to, try to learn some things, these children will develop what we know is called learned helplessness. They just learn not to try, not to make an effort to reach for something because they know something's going to be handed to them. And I can see why this, teaching them whatever skills they can learn is so important. I'm going on to talk now about the characteristics of another of this group of children, characteristics of traumatic brain injury kids. And as I said before, this is a really complex injury. On page 405 in our textbook, there's a description that I thought you might be interested in looking at. I'm just pointing that out to you. It does show the kinds of changes and impairments that a traumatic brain injury could cause. So I'll maybe just read a little bit of this to you. I'm on page 405. It has a set of bullets. One group, the physical and sensory changes. So this child might have hearing impairment, alterations in their sense of taste or their sense of touch and smell. They might have sleep problems. They might have poor body temperature regulation. That's just in physical and sensory, that category. In terms of cognitive changes and academic problems, I'll read a few of these to you. Difficulty concentrating or attending to task at hand. Attention is often very disrupted with a traumatic brain injury. Difficulty making transitions, so moving from home to school or from class to class. This is very disruptive and confusing to them. Not to mention, difficulty transitioning from one learning task to another. And then the social, emotional, and behavioral area or category of this group of injuries: chronic agitation, irritability, restlessness, anxiety, increased aggressiveness. These are things that can be effects of traumatic brain injury. Difficulty dealing with change, decreased insight into their own self, their behavior, and the behavior of others. They might talk compulsively or excessively. So I'm just remembering as I talk about this with you, several years ago, maybe 12 to 15 years ago, we had a student, a college student, who had been in a terrible car accident, and she had a traumatic brain injury. And she had gotten such that she could ambulate, and she had been a bright person. She had been a university student. And so she made some real gains to be able to participate in a classroom. And so her parents enrolled her at Sandhills, and she was in our program for a while. But as I'm reading some of these descriptors, she definitely had some of these impairments. It was pretty hard for her to concentrate for any much of a period of time. She also had some inappropriate behaviors where she would talk out and continue to keep talking. I still think it was great for her to be in our class. She really only stayed for a semester, but my heart went out to her because she had been a person who had a complete life of normal and typical development, but she had a traumatic brain injury. The impairments in general that exist for these children with TBI, switching now back to talking about children, their symptoms really vary quite wildly, right, depending on what part of the brain is damaged. But they do have three categories of difficulties. One of those is, as you might expect, difficulties in social and communication. They also have difficulties in their physical and sensory self. These are the categories actually that I just read to you from. And then also cognitive impairments. So that's what you're going to see. That is what a student would have if they had a traumatic brain injury, but wow, on a really big continuum of impairment. I'd like to talk with you for a few more pages about prevalence and, maybe placement in education. So for multiple disabilities, the prevalence is very, very small. Estimates are it range between 0.1% of the school population to about 1% of the school